The blue light from my iPhone screen was the only thing illuminating the pitch-black interior of the Toyota Camry. It was 3:17 in the morning. We were tearing down Interstate 15 at 90 miles per hour, surrounded by the suffocating darkness of the Mojave Desert. I looked down at my phone to check the GPS arrival time. My heart stopped. The notification on the screen did not say 2 hours to Las Vegas. It read, in bright red letters, "Your ride has been canceled by the driver." I froze. I slowly lifted my eyes to look at the back of the driver's head. He was humming a soft, unrecognizable tune. His hands were 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. If the driver named Anthony had just canceled the ride from his home in Los Angeles, then who was the man sitting 2 feet in front of me? Fear, cold and sharp, injected itself directly into my veins. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the app crashed. However, the silence in the car suddenly felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I needed to test the waters without alerting him. I cleared my throat. I politely asked him if we could pull over at the next gas station because I felt sick. He did not answer. He did not even flinch. He just kept staring straight ahead at the endless stretch of asphalt illuminated by the high beams. Then, I heard it. Click. The sound was subtle, but in the silence of the desert, it sounded like a gunshot. It was the sound of the central locking system engaging. Panic exploded in my chest. I shifted my body toward the door, trying to be casual. I wrapped my fingers around the cold plastic of the door handle. I pulled. Nothing happened. I pulled again, harder this time. The door was dead. The child lock was engaged. I was trapped in a metal box moving at 90 miles per hour with a complete stranger who was pretending to be Anthony. Suddenly, the car swerved. We were not slowing down. We were exiting the highway. The tires screeched against the pavement as he yanked the wheel to the right, taking a desolate exit ramp that led nowhere but deeper into the barren wasteland. I screamed. I demanded to know where he was taking me. I pounded my fist against the window, screaming for help. But there was no one for miles. Just rocks, sand, and the moon. He finally spoke, but he did not turn around. He looked at me through the rearview mirror. His eyes were hidden in the shadows, but I could feel his smile. He whispered that I should save my energy because it was going to be a very long night. This was not a mistake. This was not a glitch. I was being abducted. My mind raced back to 3 hours ago. I had been at a party in downtown Los Angeles. It was loud, crowded, and I had gotten into a fight with my boyfriend, Mark. We had broken up right there on the sidewalk. I was crying. I was emotional. I just wanted to go home to my parents in Las Vegas to cool off. I booked the first rideshare I could find. I remembered the car pulling up. A black sedan. The license plate matched the first 3 digits. I did not check the rest. I was too upset. I just opened the door and slid in. The driver had worn a baseball cap pulled low. He had nodded when I asked if he was Anthony. I had made the mistake that every safety video warns you about. I got in without checking. Now, the car bounced violently as we hit a dirt road. The smooth hum of the highway was replaced by the crunch of gravel and rocks. Dust billowed up behind us, choking out the moonlight. We were miles from civilization. I fumbled with my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I needed to call 911. I tapped the emergency button. The screen flickered. No service. The signal bars were empty. We were in a dead zone. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. He knew this. He knew exactly where the signal died. I looked around the car for a weapon. My purse was on the floor. My keys. I had a pepper spray keychain, but it was buried somewhere in the bottom of my bag. The car slowed down. We came to a stop in the middle of a dry lake bed. The silence outside was deafening. The engine idled, sending a vibration through the seats that rattled my teeth. He killed the engine. The headlights cut out. Absolute darkness swallowed us. I stopped breathing. I sat perfectly still, pressing my back against the seat, wishing I could dissolve into the upholstery. Then, the dome light flickered on. He turned around in his seat to face me. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. He was wearing a surgical mask and sunglasses. I could not see his features, but I saw the knife in his hand. It was a hunting knife, the blade serrated and gleaming under the weak yellow interior light. He did not look at me. He did not yell. He just pointed the knife at my phone. He ordered me to pass it to him. His voice distorted and raspy. He hesitated. He lunged. The blade slashed through the air, inches from my face, slicing into the leather headrest next to my ear. I screamed and threw the phone at him. He caught it with his free hand. He looked at the screen, saw the failed emergency call, and chuckled. It was a dry, hollow sound. He rolled down his window and tossed my iPhone out into the darkness. I heard it shatter against a rock. My lifeline was gone. He turned back to me. He told me that Anthony was safe at home in his bed. He explained that Anthony had a flat tire 3 blocks away from the club because someone had slashed it. He explained that he had been watching me for weeks. He knew my name. He knew I studied architecture. He knew I had just broken up with Mark. This was not random. This was a targeted hunt. He opened his door and stepped out into the night. The sound of his boots crunching on the gravel sent shivers down my spine. He walked around to the trunk of the car. I heard the trunk pop open. I heard the sound of duct tape being ripped off the roll. Reap. Reap. I had seconds. Maybe 10. Maybe 20. I scrambled to the other side of the back seat, trying the other door handle. Locked. I kicked the window with both feet. The glass held. It was safety glass, designed not to shatter easily. I needed a weapon. I dumped my purse upside down on the seat. Lipstick. Wallet. Textbook. Water bottle. Me fingers brushed against cold metal. My keys. Attached to the keys was the small pink canister of pepper spray my dad had bought me before I left for college. I grabbed it. My thumb found the trigger. But then I saw something else fall out of my bag. A small, silver locket. It had fallen open. Inside was a picture of me and Mark, taken 2 years ago. I stared at the photo. Suddenly, a thought struck me. A terrifying, impossible thought. The driver knew I broke up with Mark tonight. Only Mark and I knew that. We had not told anyone. We had argued on a deserted street corner. How did the driver know? The trunk slammed shut. He was coming for me. I gripped the pepper spray. I crouched low, ready to spring. I would not be here tonight. I would not be another headline on the morning news. The rear door on my left flew open. He stood there, silhouetted against the stars. Holding a roll of duct tape and the knife, he reached for me. I did not scream. I waited until his face was inches from the doorframe. Then, I unleashed hell. The stream of orange liquid erupted from the pink canister. It hit him directly in the eyes. He screamed. It was a guttural, animalistic sound that tore through the silence of the desert night. He recoiled, clutching his face with both hands. The knife dropped from his grip. It clattered against the metal doorframe and fell into the dirt. I did not hesitate. I threw my body weight against the open door. I scrambled out of the car, my knees scraping violently against the sharp gravel. The pain was instant. However, the adrenaline flooding my system masked it completely. I scrambled to my feet. I ran. I did not look back. I sprinted into the suffocating darkness of the dry lake bed. The ground was uneven, littered with scrub brush and jagged rocks that threatened to twist my ankle with every step. Behind me, I heard him roaring in rage. I heard the crunch of his boots as he stumbled blindly around the car. He was cursing my name. He was screaming that I would pay for this. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until the black silhouette of the sedan was swallowed by the night. I dove behind a large cluster of boulders and pressed my body into the cold, rough stone. I clamped my hands over my mouth to stifle the sound of my ragged breathing. Complete silence returned to the desert. But it was a heavy, watching silence. My mind began to fracture. The terror of the present began to bleed into the memories of the immediate past. I needed to understand how I ended up here. I needed to understand why a stranger wanted me dead. My thoughts drifted back to 4 hours ago. It was 11:30 at night. The music at the loft party in downtown Los Angeles had been deafening. I was standing on the balcony with Mark. Mark was my boyfriend of 2 years. Or at least, he was until tonight. I remembered the look in his eyes. It was not anger. It was something colder. Possession. He had grabbed my wrist too tightly. He accused me of smiling at the bartender. He accused me of wanting to leave him. His jealousy had been escalating for months. It started with checking my phone. Then it became surprise visits to my architecture studio at UCLA. Tonight, he had crossed a line. I remembered pulling my hand away. I remembered the stinging sensation on my wrist where his fingers had dug in. I told him it was over. I told him I could not breathe anymore. He had not yelled. He had gone terrifyingly quiet. He just stared at me with those dark, intense eyes and whispered that I would never leave him. He said we were bound together. I had fled the party. I was crying. I was vulnerable. I just wanted to escape his suffocating presence. I pulled out my phone and booked the Uber. When the black sedan pulled up, I thought it was my chariot to freedom. I was wrong. I looked down at my hands in the moonlight. They were trembling uncontrollably. I gripped the pepper spray canister so hard my knuckles were white. Suddenly, a beam of light cut through the darkness. He had a flashlight. The beam swept across the desert floor, dancing over the sagebrush and rocks like a searching eye. He was hunting. And he was methodical. He was not running around blindly anymore. He was moving slowly. Deliberately. I peeked around the edge of the boulder. He was about 200 yards away, near the car. He had recovered faster than I expected. The pepper spray must have been old, or he had a high tolerance for pain. His voice drifted across the dry air. It was amplified, booming. He must have had a megaphone in the trunk. Or perhaps the acoustics of the valley were carrying his voice. He called out to me. He did not call me Lisa. He called me Little Architect. My blood froze in my veins. Mark used to call me that. It was his pet name for me. He would say it affectionately when I was working late on my models. Good night, Little Architect. But Mark was in Los Angeles. Mark was 5'9" with brown hair and a soft build. The man by the car was over 6 feet tall. He was broad-shouldered. He moved with a predatory grace that Mark never possessed. Could Mark have hired someone? No. Mark was possessive. He would never let another man touch me. The beam of light swung closer to my hiding spot. I ducked back. I needed to move. I needed a plan. I was an architecture student. I understood space. I understood structures. Even in this chaotic wilderness, there was a logic to the landscape. I closed my eyes for a second, visualizing the terrain I had seen when we exited the highway. To the east, the ground rose sharply. A ridge. To the west, the flat expanse of the lake bed. To the north, the highway. The highway was my only chance. It was miles away. But if I could reach the asphalt, I could flag down a trucker. I could survive. I began to crawl. I moved on my hands and knees, keeping the boulders between me and the flashlight. The rocks dug into my palms. Dust filled my nose. Every snap of a twig sounded like a gunshot in my ears. I moved for what felt like an eternity. Then, my hand touched something soft. I recoiled. It was not a rock. It was fabric. I squinted in the darkness. It was a backpack. A faded blue JanSport backpack, half buried in the sand. It looked old, weathered by the sun and wind. Curiosity warred with fear. I reached out and unzipped the main compartment. My hand brushed against something smooth and hard. A wallet. I pulled it out and opened it. A driver's license. The face on the license was a young woman. Blonde hair. Bright smile. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. I looked at the date of birth. She was 22. My age. I dug deeper into the bag. A textbook. Introduction to Psychology. A water bottle. And a phone. The battery was dead. The screen cracked. I realized with a sickening jolt that this was not trash. This was a trophy. Or worse. It was the remains of a previous victim. He had brought me to his killing ground. I was not the first. The realization stripped away any remaining hope that this was just a robbery gone wrong. This was a ritual. Suddenly, the beam of light swept over my head. It stopped. It backtracked. The light flooded the area around the backpack. I pressed myself flat against the ground, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. He laughed. It was a low, mocking sound. He announced that he had found my footprints. He complimented my choice of running shoes. Nikes. Size 7. He knew my shoe size. How? I remembered a week ago. I had come home to my apartment in Westwood. My closet door had been slightly ajar. I thought nothing of it. I thought my roommate, Jenny, had borrowed a sweater, but Jenny had been out of town. Someone had been in my room. Someone had been watching me sleep. Someone had been learning every intimate detail of my life while I remained oblivious. The heavy crunch of boots grew louder. He was coming toward the boulders. I had to abandon stealth. I had to run. I sprang up from the ground, leaving the backpack of the dead girl behind. I sprinted toward the rising slope of the ridge. "There you are," he roared. The chase was back on. This time, he was close. I could hear his heavy breathing. I could hear the flashlight beam cutting through the air just inches from my heels. I scrambled up the rocky slope. My fingernails tore against the stone. I slipped, sliding back a few feet, scraping my shin raw. I scrambled again, fueled by pure terror. I reached the top of the ridge. I looked down. On the other side, there was no highway. There was no salvation. There was a fence. A tall, chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Beyond it lay a dark, industrial complex. Abandoned warehouses. Rusted silos. It looked like an old mining facility or a military test site. I was trapped. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. I turned around. He stood at the bottom of the ridge, aiming the flashlight up at me. The light blinded me, turning him into a faceless monster. He did not climb. He just stood there. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a phone. Not my phone. His phone. He dialed a number. Suddenly, a ringing sound echoed through the silence. It was close. It was right next to me. I froze. He patted my pockets. My phone was gone. He had thrown it away, but the ringing was coming from my jacket pocket. I reached in with trembling fingers. I pulled out a small, black device. It was a burner phone. An old Nokia. I had never seen this phone before in my life. Someone had planted it on me. The screen lit up. Incoming call, Daddy. My breath hitched. My father died 3 years ago. I stared at the glowing screen. The ringing was piercing. A digital scream in the desert night. I looked down at the man. He was holding his phone to his ear, waiting. He wanted me to answer. If I answered, I was playing his game. If I ran, the razor wire would cut me to ribbons. My thumb hovered over the green button. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to know who was behind the mask. I pressed answer. I brought the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was not the raspy, distorted voice from the car. It was smooth, calm, familiar. "Hello, Lisa," the voice said. "Did you really think you could break up with me and just drive away?" It was Mark's voice. But Mark was in LA. I saw him at the party. I looked down at the man at the bottom of the ridge. He lowered his phone. He reached up and pulled off his sunglasses. Then, he reached behind his head and unclasped the surgical mask. The moonlight revealed his face. It was not Mark. It was a stranger. A man with a scar running down his left cheek. A man I had never seen before. But the voice on the phone, it was Mark. "I'm confused. Lisa." Mark's voice continued through the speaker, chillingly clear. "You're looking at my associate, Mr. Vane. He's very upset that you sprayed him. But don't worry. I'm watching everything." I looked around frantically. On top of one of the rusted silos in the distance, A small red light blinked. A camera. I was not just being hunted. I was being live-streamed. The red light on the camera blinked. It was a rhythm. On. Off. On. Off. Like a digital heartbeat watching my terror. I stared at the lens, paralyzed by the realization. I was not just a victim. I was content. Mark was broadcasting my nightmare to an audience I could not see. Mark's voice purred through the cheap speaker of the burner phone. He told me to stop staring at the camera and start running. He warned me that Mr. Vane was getting impatient. I looked down. The man named Vane was putting his mask back on. He cracked his neck. Crack. Crack. Then, he started to climb the ridge. He moved with terrifying speed, scrambling up the loose rocks like a spider. I had seconds. I turned to the fence. It was 12 feet high, topped with coils of rusted razor wire. There was no way to climb it without shredding my hands to ribbons. I was trapped between the wire and the knife. Suddenly, a loud buzzer screamed through the night air. Buzzed. A section of the fence, a heavy industrial gate that I had missed in the darkness, rattled. The chain drive motor groaned. The gate began to slide open slowly, creating a gap just wide enough for a person to slip through. Mark chuckled in my ear. He whispered that the game had officially started. He told me the rules were simple. If I could make it to the main office tower on the other side of the complex before Vane caught me, I could go free. I knew he was lying. However, I had no choice. I squeezed through the opening gate. The smell hit me instantly. It was the scent of decay. Rust. Old oil. And something sweeter. Rotting meat. I found myself standing in the courtyard of a massive, abandoned cement factory. Towering silos loomed over me like dead giants. Conveyor belts snaked through the air, broken and twisted. Shadows stretched across the cracked concrete, creating 1,000 hiding places for monsters. Run, Lisa, Mark commanded. I ran. I sprinted toward the nearest structure. A cavernous warehouse with missing walls. My sneakers slapped against the concrete. My breath came in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard the gate buzz again. Then, the heavy clang of metal hitting metal. Vane was inside. I dove into the warehouse. It was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling pillars. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting skeletal patterns on the floor. I needed to think like an architect. I scanned the space. This was a processing plant. Heavy machinery on the ground floor. Catwalks above. The layout would be linear, designed for assembly lines. If I stayed on the ground, I was a rat in a maze. I needed elevation. I spotted a rusted metal staircase spiraling up a support pillar. I scrambled toward it. My footsteps echoed too loudly in the hollow space. Clang. 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 I reached the stairs and started to climb. The metal groaned under my weight. Rust flakes rained down on my face. Don't go up there, Mark's voice said suddenly. I froze. Why? I whispered, my voice trembling. Because Vane likes it when they go up, Mark replied casually. No exit. Just a dead end. He enjoys cornering them. He hesitated. Was he helping me, or was he guiding me into a trap? Turn around. Lisa, Mark urged. Go to the basement level. The loading docks. That's the way out. I gripped the cold railing. I looked down. Through the shadows of the machinery, I saw movement. Vane was entering the warehouse. He was not running. He was walking. He dragged the tip of his hunting knife along a metal pipe as he walked. Skrira appa. The sound set my teeth on edge. I made a choice. I ignored Mark. I kept climbing. I knew Mark was a control freak. He wanted to dictate my path. If he wanted me in the basement, it was because the basement was a kill box. I scrambled up to the catwalk. It was narrow, suspended 30 feet above the concrete floor. The railing was missing in sections. One slip, and I would fall to my death. I crouched low, moving silently along the metal grate. I looked down. Vane stopped. He tilted his head, listening. He looked directly at the basement entrance. He was waiting for me to follow Mark's instructions. I had guessed right. Mark sighed into the phone. He sounded disappointed. He told me I was being a bad girl. He said disobedience had consequences. Suddenly, the lights in the warehouse flickered. Someone had turned on the main power. Floodlights mounted on the ceiling exploded into life. The blinding white light washed away the shadows. I was exposed. I was a dark silhouette on a high wire. Vane looked up. He saw me. He pointed his knife at me. Even from this distance, I could see the excitement in his eyes behind the sunglasses. He abandoned the basement and started running toward the stairs. I had to move. I sprinted along the catwalk. The metal grated and shook. I reached the end of the walkway. Dead end. Mark laughed. I told you so. I looked around frantically. The catwalk ended at a brick wall. But there was a window. It was high up, about 4 feet above the railing. The glass was broken, but the frame was intact. Vane was on the stairs. Clang. 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 He was fast. I grabbed the top of the window frame. I pulled myself up. My muscles screamed. I kicked off the railing and scrambled through the opening. I fell. I landed hard on a pile of old sandbags on a rooftop outside. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I rolled over, gasping for air. I was on the roof of a lower building connecting to the main silos. I scrambled to my feet. I checked the burner phone. The call was still active. Impressive, Mark said. His voice had changed. He sounded excited now. You always were athletic. That's why I liked you. Go to hell. Mark. I spat into the phone. Not yet. Darling, he replied. Look to your left. I looked. On the adjacent roof, about 50 feet away, there was a small, lit booth. It looked like a security checkpoint. There's a key in there, Mark said. A master key for the main tower. You need it if you want to win. I didn't trust him. But I had no other objective. I ran across the rooftop. I jumped over a gap between the buildings. It was a 3-foot jump. Easy. I landed and kept running. I reached the booth. The door was unlocked. I burst inside and slammed the door. I locked it. It was a tiny room. A desk. A chair. A monitor on the wall. I froze. The monitor was on. It showed a live feed. It was a split screen. On the left side, it showed me, standing in the booth, staring at the screen. The camera was mounted in the corner of the ceiling. On the right side, it showed a bedroom. My bedroom. In Westwood. But it wasn't empty. There was a girl tied to a chair in the middle of my room. She had duct tape over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror. It was Jenny. My roommate. I screamed. I dropped the phone on the desk. Jenny, I yelled at the screen. Uselessly. Mark's voice came from the phone on the desk. She came home early. Lisa. Surprise. I grabbed the phone again. Let her go. This is between us. It is. Mark agreed. But every game needs stakes. Here is the deal. Mister. Vane is coming for you. He will be there in 3 minutes. If you get caught, Vane kills you. And if you my associate in Westwood kills Jenny. I watched the screen. A masked figure stepped into the frame in my bedroom. He held a gun to Jenny's head. I felt like I was going to vomit. The guilt crashed over me. Jenny was innocent. She was only dying because she lived with me. 2 minutes. 50 seconds. Mark counted down. I looked around the booth for the key. There was no key. The desk was empty. Where is it? I screamed. Where is the key? Oh, Mark said. I lied. There is no key. I just wanted you to see Jenny. I wanted you to know that your actions have consequences. He was toying with me. He was breaking me down piece by piece. Bang. The door of the booth shook. Something heavy had hit it from the outside. I spun around. Vane was there. He was grinning through the small glass window of the door. He held a fire axe in his hands. He swung the axe. Crash. The blade bit through the wood of the door. Splinters flew into the room. I was trapped in a glass box on a roof. I looked for another exit. There was a window on the back wall. It looked out over the courtyard. It was a 20-foot drop to a pile of scrap metal. If I jumped, I would break a leg. If I stayed, I would be chopped to pieces. Vane swung again. Crash. A hole opened in the door. He reached his hand through to unlock the deadbolt. I grabbed the heavy metal chair from the desk. I didn't use it to bar the door. I smashed it against the back window. The glass shattered. I climbed onto the sill. I looked down at the dark, jagged metal below. Don't do it. Lisa. Mark warned. You'll break your legs. Then you're easy pickings. I looked at the monitor one last time. Jenny was crying, shaking her head. I'm coming for you. Mark, I whispered. He jumped. I did not aim for the ground. I aimed for a rusty chute that extended from the side of the building. It was a debris chute, used to slide trash down to a dumpster. I hit the metal chute hard. My hip slammed against the steel. I screamed in pain. I slid. I rocketed down the dark, enclosed tunnel of the chute. I gathered speed. The friction burned my skin through my jeans. I shot out of the bottom of the chute. I flew through the air and landed in a massive dumpster filled with industrial cardboard and insulation foam. It was soft. dusty, smelling of mold, but soft. I scrambled out of the dumpster. Coughing, I fell onto the concrete. My body ached. My hip felt like it was on fire, but I could stand. Nothing was broken. I looked up at the roof. Vane was standing at the window, looking down. He seemed angry. He raised the axe and pointed it at the main tower in the distance. He was hurting me. I checked the phone. The screen was cracked, but Mark was still there. Lucky, Mark muttered. Very lucky. But luck runs out. I started limping toward the main tower. It was the tallest structure in the complex. A concrete monolith that touched the sky. Why the tower? Mark, I asked, trying to keep him talking while I moved. What's in the tower? The finale, Mark said. And à réunion. I stopped. What do you mean? You'll see, he said. By the way, check your battery. I looked at the screen. 5%. When the phone dies, Mark said softly. I stopped telling Vane to hold back. Run. Little architect. Run. I looked at the towering concrete structure ahead. It was dark, silent, and imposing. It looked like a tombstone. I gritted my teeth. I ignored the pain in my hip. I forced my legs to move. I was not running away anymore. I was running toward him. I stood at the base of the concrete tower. The structure loomed over me like a giant, gray tombstone against the starry sky. It was an unfinished office building, a skeletal monument to a failed industrial project. I checked the burner phone one last time. The screen flickered. The battery icon turned red. Then, it went black. Click. The connection was dead. Mark was gone. However, his warning echoed in my mind. When the phone dies, Vane stops holding back. I did not have to wait long to verify his threat. Behind me, from the darkness of the courtyard, a roar erupted. It was the sound of a chainsaw revving to life. Vroom. The sound was deafening. Vane had traded his axe for something much louder. Something that could cut through bone in seconds. I turned and ran into the tower. I slammed the heavy steel door behind me and threw the rusted deadbolt. It would not hold him for long, but it would buy me minutes. I found myself in a stairwell. It was narrow, smelling of urine and wet concrete. I started to climb. First floor. Second floor. Third floor. My legs burned. My hip throbbed with every step. But the terror of the chainsaw buzzing below pushed me upward. Screech. The sound of metal cutting metal reverberated up the shaft. Vane was cutting through the door. I climbed faster. I needed to reach the top. Mark had said the finale was in the tower. He said there would be a reunion. I held on to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, Mark was being held hostage up there too. Maybe the voice on the phone was forced. I reached the 10th floor. The top floor. There was a single door at the end of a long, dark hallway. Light spilled from underneath it. I walked toward the light. I was limping. I was exhausted. I was ready to fight or die. I pushed the door open. I stopped. I blinked, trying to process the scene before me. It was not a torture chamber. It was not a dusty, abandoned room. It was a stage set. The room was clean. A generator hummed in the corner, powering a bank of floodlights. In the center of the room, there was a table set for two. A white tablecloth. A bottle of expensive red wine. 2 crystal glasses. And sitting at the table was Mark. He was not tied up. He was not bleeding. He was wearing a tuxedo. He looked handsome. Calm. He was swirling the wine in his glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. He looked up at me and smiled. It was the same charming smile he gave me the night we met. "You're late. Little architect," he said softly. "Dinner is getting cold." My world shattered. The exhaustion caused my knees to buckle. I grabbed the door frame for support. "Mark," I whispered. You're doing this." Mark stood up. He walked toward me, his arms open for a hug. "I'm doing this for us. Lisa," he said. "I'm fixing us." I recoiled. I stumbled back into the hallway. "Stay away from me," I screamed. Mark stopped. His smile faded slightly. He looked disappointed. "Lisa, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to that smooth, manipulative tone I knew so well. "You were leaving me. You were making a mistake. You thought you didn't need me. I had to show you. Show me what I cried. That you're a psychopath. That I am the only one who can save you." Mark replied calmly. He gestured to a monitor on the wall. I looked. The screen showed the stairwell camera. Vane was charging up the stairs, the chainsaw raised high. He was a monster made of noise and violence. "Look at him," Mark said. "He's a beast. A chaotic force of nature. He wants to tear you apart. And right now, Lisa, who is the only person standing between you and that chainsaw?" I stared at Mark. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. This was not a murder plot. This was a theater production. Mark had hired Vane to play the villain so that Mark could play the hero. He wanted to traumatize me, break me down until I was terrified, and then step in to rescue me. He wanted me to owe him my life. He wanted to bind me to him through trauma. It was the ultimate act of possession. "You're sick," I spat. "Where is Jenny?" "Jenny is fine." Mark dismissed. "That video was pre-recorded weeks ago. She's probably sleeping in her bed right now. This is just about you and me." The sound of the chainsaw grew louder. Vane was on the floor below. "Here is how this ends," Mark said, walking back to the table. He picked up a handgun that was sitting next to the wine bottle. A sleek, black 9mm. He checked the chamber. "Vane comes through that door." Mark explained, like a director walking through a script. "He attacks you. I shoot him. I save you. We go home. You cry in my arms. We get married. And you never, ever try to leave me again." He held out his hand. "Come here. Lisa. Stand behind me. Let me be your hero." I looked at the gun. I looked at the door. Vane was coming. Mark was armed. If I ran, Vane would catch me. If I stayed, I belong to Mark forever. Suddenly, a thought struck me. A detail from the architecture of the building. I had noticed it when I entered. This tower was unfinished. The elevator shaft was open, and on this floor, the construction crew had left a pallet of heavy cinder blocks near the edge of the shaft, held back by a temporary wooden railing. I looked at Mark. He was confident. He thought he wrote the script, but he forgot one thing. I was the architect. This was my building. Okay, I whispered. I stepped into the room. I lowered my head, feigning submission. Mark smiled. Victory. Good girl, he said. Stand behind me. I walked toward him, but I did not stop behind him. I kept walking toward the table. Lisa Mark asked, "Where are you going?" I grabbed the wine bottle. I didn't hit him with it. I smashed it against the generator in the corner. Crash. Red wine splashed into the vents of the running generator. The liquid shorted the circuits. Sparks flew. Pop. Sizzle. The floodlights died. The room plunged into absolute darkness. Lisa Mark screamed. "What are you doing?" I moved. I knew the layout of the room. I had memorized it in the split second before the lights died. I dropped to the floor and crawled. Mark fired the gun blindly. Bang. The muzzle flash illuminated the room for a fraction of a second. I saw him spinning around, panic in his eyes. I reached the open doorway. I rolled out into the hallway. I stood up and ran toward the elevator shaft at the end of the hall. Behind me, Mark was stumbling in the dark, cursing. But ahead of me, the stairwell door exploded inward. Roar! Vane burst onto the floor. The chainsaw blade sparked against the doorframe. In the dim moonlight, filtering from the stairwell, Vane looked massive. He saw me. He didn't care about Mark. He didn't care about the script. He just saw prey. He charged. I stood my ground in front of the open elevator shaft. The temporary wooden railing dug into my back. It was flimsy. Behind me was a 10-story drop into darkness. "Come on," I screamed at Vane. Vane raised the chainsaw. He lung it. At the last second, I dropped to the ground. Vane's momentum carried him forward. Ideally, he would have tripped over me, but he didn't. He was too fast. He sidestepped my body. However, the chainsaw was heavy. The momentum of the swinging blade pulled him off balance. He crashed into the wooden railing. Crack. The wood splintered. Vane teetered on the edge. The chainsaw slipped from his hands and fell into the abyss. Clang. 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 But Vane didn't fall. His hand shot out and grabbed a metal rebar protruding from the concrete floor. He hung there, dangling over the edge, his boots scrabbling for purchase. I scrambled back. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway flickered on. Mark had reset the breaker on the generator. Mark stepped into the hallway. He held the gun. He looked furious. His tuxedo was stained with wine. He saw Vane hanging from the edge. He saw me cowering on the floor. This was off script. "Help me," Van screamed, his voice raw and terrified. "Mark, help me. Pull me up." Mark looked at Vane. Then he looked at me. He realized the hero narrative was ruined. I had seen too much. The game was broken. Mark raised the gun. He did not aim at Vane. He aimed at me. You ruined it, Mark said coldly. We could have been happy. Now, I have to write a tragedy. I closed my eyes. There was nowhere to run. Bang. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. I flinched, waiting for the pain. But it didn't come. I opened my eyes. Mark looked confused. He looked down at his chest. A red blossom was spreading on his white shirt. He dropped the gun. He fell to his knees. Then, he collapsed face forward onto the concrete floor. Standing behind him, in the doorway of the penthouse, was a figure. It was Sarah Jenkins, the girl from the ID card in the backpack. The dead girl. She was alive. She was dirty. Her clothes torn. Her hair matted with blood. She held a flare gun in her shaking hands. A smoking hole was burned through the back of Mark's tuxedo. She had been hiding in the tower the whole time. I stared at her. She stared at me. He missed one, Sarah whispered. Then, she looked at the elevator shaft. Vane was still hanging there, struggling to pull himself up. He looked at Mark's body, then at Sarah. Sarah raised the flare gun again. It was a single-shot weapon. It was empty. But she didn't need a bullet. She walked over to the edge of the shaft. She looked down at Vane. Vane pleaded. Please. I was just doing a job. Please. Sarah looked at me. Do you want to do the honors? She asked. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my anger was steady. I walked to the edge. I looked at the man who had terrorized me for hours. The man who had played a monster for money. I looked at his fingers gripping the rebar. I raised my foot. You're fired, I said. I stomped on his fingers. Vane screamed. His grip broke. He fell backward into the darkness. His scream lasted for a long time. Then, there was a dull thud far below. Silence returned to the tower. I looked at Sarah. We were two survivors in a tower of death. But it wasn't over. We heard sirens in the distance. Blue and red lights flashed against the desert sky. Mark must have called the police beforehand. Part of his script. The police were supposed to find a hero comforting a survivor. Instead, they were going to find two women standing over a corpse. I looked at Mark's body. I saw his phone lying next to his hand. It was unlocked. I picked it up. I saw a text message thread. The contact name was the client. I froze. Wait. Mark hired Vane. So Mark should be the client. I scrolled up. Mark, everything is set. She's terrified. I'll be the hero by dawn. The client good. Make sure the footage is clear. Our subscribers paid a premium for this season finale. My blood turned to ice. Mark wasn't the director. He was just an actor too. Someone else was watching. Someone else was paying for this. And Mark was just a pawn who got sacrificed for a better plot twist. I looked at the camera in the corner of the hallway. The red light was still blinking. On. Off. On. Off. The show was still live. The blue strobe lights of the police helicopters washed over the concrete tower. I shielded my eyes against the blinding glare of the searchlights. The wind from the rotors whipped Sarah's hair across her face. She did not move. She just stared at Mark's body with a hollow, empty expression. I looked at the camera in the corner. The red light stopped blinking. Off. The show was over. The audience had logged off. Suddenly, the stairwell door burst open. Police hands in the air. A tactical team swarmed into the room. They wore heavy body armor and carried assault rifles. They screamed commands at us. They moved with aggressive precision. I raised my shaking hands. Sarah did the same. I tried to speak. I tried to tell them that we were the victims. I tried to explain that the man on the floor was a psychopath who had orchestrated a twisted game for an online audience. But the officers did not listen. They saw two women standing over a dead body with a flare gun. They saw a crime scene. An officer grabbed my wrists. It spun me around. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked onto my skin. It felt insulting. After everything I had survived, I was being treated like the criminal. They led us down the stairs. We walked past the shattered door where Vane had cut through. We walked past the bloodstains on the concrete. When we emerged into the courtyard, the scene was chaotic. Dozens of police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks filled the dusty lot. The buzzing of the gate had been replaced by the crackle of police radios. A detective approached us. He was an older man with tired eyes and a cheap suit. He introduced himself as Detective Miller. He signaled for the officers to remove our handcuffs, but he kept his hand near his holster. He looked at me. Then he looked at Sarah. He recognized Sarah. His eyes widened. He whispered her name. Sarah Jenkins. The girl who went missing 6 months ago. The cold case that was sitting on his desk. The atmosphere shifted instantly. We were no longer suspects. We were miracles. Medics rushed forward to wrap blankets around us. They checked our vitals. They cleaned the blood off Sarah's face. However, I could not rest. My mind was still racing. I needed to show them the proof. I needed to expose the network. I grabbed Detective Miller's arm. I told him about the phone. I told him about the text messages from the client. I pointed to Mark's body, which was being zipped into a bag on a gurney. I demanded that he secure Mark's phone immediately. Miller looked skeptical. He told me to calm down. He said they would process the evidence in due time. He screamed at him. I told him there was no time. I told him the people watching us were erasing their tracks right now. My desperation convinced him. He walked over to the evidence technician who was bagging Mark's belongings. He put on a pair of latex gloves. He picked up Mark's shattered smartphone. The screen was cracked, but it still had power. I crowded in next to him. I told him to open the message thread. Miller swiped the screen. He tapped the green message icon. I held my breath. I wanted to see the number. I wanted to see the IP address. I wanted something, anything, that would lead us to the monsters who paid for this. The message thread opened. It was empty. My heart sank. "There's nothing here," Miller said, looking at me with pity. I shook my head. I reached out, ignoring protocol, and tapped the screen myself. I watched in horror as the contacts list began to dissolve. Names vanished one by one. The call logs wiped themselves clean. The phone was executing a remote factory reset. "Stop it," I yelled. "Turn it off, pull the battery." The technician tried to power it down. But it was too late. The screen went black. Then, a single white logo appeared. A smiling mask. Then, that too faded into darkness. The phone was a brick. The client had scrubbed the server. The live stream, the texts, the payment records, it was all gone. Mark was just a dead man with no digital footprint connecting him to anyone else. I felt a wave of nausea. They got away. Mark and Vane were dead. But the money behind them was safe. The eyes that had watched me nearly die were safe behind their screens, probably already looking for the next channel. Sarah walked up beside me. She was wrapped in a gold foil blanket. She looked at the blank phone screen. She did not look surprised. She whispered that they never leave a trace. She told me she had seen it before. She said Mark wasn't the first director she had dealt with. I looked at her. The horror of her statement settled in. She had been in that tower for months. She had seen other finales. She had seen other girls who weren't as lucky as me. Detective Miller was talking to his radio, calling for a cyber forensics team. But I knew it was useless. You can't catch a ghost with a net. We were driven to the station in separate cars. I sat in the back of the cruiser, watching the desert landscape roll by. The sun was beginning to rise. The sky was turning a bruised purple and orange. It was a beautiful morning. The world looked normal. People were waking up, drinking coffee, driving to work. They had no idea that hours ago, a man had hunted a woman for sport while strangers paid to watch. At the station, the interrogation was long. I told them everything. I told them about the fake Uber ride, the pepper spray, the chase, the tower, the script. They believed me about the kidnapping. They had the bodies. They had Sarah. But when I talked about the live stream and the client, they exchanged glances. They wrote it down, but I could see the doubt. They thought it was trauma-induced paranoia. They thought Mark was just a lone wolf with a delusion of grandeur. They didn't want to believe that evil was organized. It was easier to believe in one bad apple than a rotten orchard. After 6 hours, they let me go. My parents were waiting in the lobby. They had driven down from Las Vegas as soon as the police called. My mom was crying. My dad looked ready to kill someone. I hugged them. I felt their warmth. I smelled my mom's perfume. It was the smell of safety. But I didn't feel safe. I looked over my dad's shoulder. Sarah was sitting on a bench across the lobby. Her family hadn't arrived yet. She was alone, staring at a vending machine. I pulled away from my parents. I walked over to her. She looked up. Her eyes were old. Too old for 22. They didn't find the cameras, Sarah said softly. The police searched the tower. No cameras. No wires. I nodded. They must have been wireless. Someone came and took them before the cops breached the perimeter. Or, Sarah said, they were never really there. Maybe the red lights were just LEDs to scare us. Maybe the only camera was Mark's phone. It doesn't matter, I said. Mark is dead. Sarah smiled. It was a thin, fragile thing. Mark is dead. She agreed. But the subscribers are still alive. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. I found this, she whispered. In Mark's pocket, before you came up the stairs. She handed it to me. I unfolded the paper. It was a receipt. A receipt for a wire transfer. A large sum of money deposited into an offshore account. But it wasn't the amount that caught my eye. It was the reference code on the transaction. Project Architect, Season 1. My blood ran cold. Season 1. That implied there would be a Season 2. And it implied that I wasn't just a random victim picked up at a party. Project Architect meant they chose me specifically. They profiled me. They built the set for me. Sarah grabbed my hand. Her grip was strong. We survived, she said fiercely. That makes us a liability. Or it makes us the sequel. I looked at the receipt. Then I looked at the busy police station. Officers were drinking coffee. Civilians were filing complaints. I spotted a security camera in the corner of the ceiling. A black dome. I stared directly into the lens. I wondered who was watching the feed. I wondered if the client had hacked into the police station too. I crushed the receipt in my hand. I was not going to run anymore. I was not going to hide in my room and hope the monsters went away. I turned to Sarah. Let's not be the sequel, I whispered. Sarah tilted her head. Then what are we? I looked at the burner phone that the police had returned to me in an evidence bag. It was useless. Dead tech. But it was a reminder. We are the spoilers, I said. I put the crumpled receipt into my pocket. I walked back to my parents. As we walked out of the station doors into the blinding morning sun, I didn't feel relief. I felt a cold, hard purpose forming in my chest. The desert was behind me. The tower was empty. But the game wasn't over. The players had just changed sides. 2 months have passed since the night in the tower. The media called it the Desert Tower Murders. They called Mark a deranged stalker. They called Vane a hired gun. The police closed the case. They said justice was served. However, they never found the client. I sat in my new apartment in Seattle. It was raining outside. Raindrops raced down the windowpane like tears. I looked around the room. It was sparse. Minimal furniture. No smart devices. No Alexa. No Google Home. Just analog clocks and physical locks. I walked over to my laptop on the desk. A piece of black electrical tape covered the webcam. It was a small shield against a massive, invisible enemy. Sarah walked into the room. She was holding 2 mugs of tea. We lived together now. We were not just roommates. We were an army of 2. We spent our nights on the dark web, tracking digital footprints, looking for the code Project Architect. Sarah placed the tea on the desk. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. Dangerous. She pointed at the laptop screen. We got a ping, she whispered. I sat down. I opened the encrypted browser. A message had appeared in our secure inbox. It had no sender ID. No subject line. Just a link. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I knew I should not click it. I knew it was bait. But we were not hiding anymore. We were hunting. I clicked the link. A video player opened. It was a live feed. My breath hitched. The camera was positioned high up. It showed a lecture hall. Rows of students taking notes. A professor writing on a chalkboard. I recognized the room. It was an architecture lecture hall at UCLA. My old school. The camera zoomed in. It focused on a young girl in the third row. She had long dark hair. She was smiling at her phone. She looked innocent. Oblivious. Text appeared on the screen, overlaid in red font. Subject, the artist. Season 2. Status casting complete. I felt a cold rage burning in my chest. They had found a new Mark. They had found a new Lisa. The game was starting all over again. Sarah leaned in closer. She gripped my shoulder. We have to warn her. Sarah said. No. I replied. Warning her isn't enough. We have to stop the show. I typed a reply into the chat box below the video. I am watching you. A second later, a reply appeared from the admin. We know. Welcome back. Architect. We missed your ratings. They wanted me to watch. They wanted me to be part of the audience this time. They thought I would be paralyzed by fear. They were wrong. I reached into my drawer. I pulled out the hard drive we had recovered from Mark's cloud backup before the police wiped it. It contained fragments of code. Digital fingerprints. I plugged it into the laptop. Upload the virus. I told Sarah. Sarah smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen in months. She hit enter. On the screen, the live feed flickered. The image of the innocent girl in the lecture hall distorted. Static took over. Then, the feed cut to black. A new message appeared from the admin. Connection lost. It was a small victory. A temporary delay. But it was a start. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city below. Thousands of windows. Thousands of lives. People walking their dogs. People waiting for Uber rides. People swiping on dating apps. They all thought they were safe. They thought the screen in their pocket was a tool. They didn't realize it was a leash. I turned away from the window. I looked directly at you. Yes. You. The one listening to this story. You think this is just a script? You think this is just content for your entertainment? Check your phone settings. Check your permissions. Who has access to your camera? Who has access to your microphone? Mark was a monster. But he was just an actor. The real monster is the one who pays to watch. And the scary part, you never know when the camera starts rolling. You might be the main character of Season 2 right now. And you wouldn't even know it until the door locks. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. A notification from a rideshare app. Your driver is arriving in 2 minutes. I didn't order a ride. I looked at Sarah. She pulled a handgun from her waistband. I grabbed my car keys and the pepper spray. We walked to the door. We didn't lock it behind us. Let them come. The show is canceled.